Hello, today is June 19th, 2024. I'm meeting today with Herb TETER at his home in Laramie, Wyoming. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm with the Northern Colorado Veterans History Project. Welcome, Herb, and thanks for sitting down today to tell your story.
Thanks a lot, Brad, for inviting me to do this.
Looking forward to it here. Let's start out, if we could. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your date of birth, where you're born, a little bit about your family.
Okay, I was born January 29, 1952 at Cambridge, Nebraska. I was the fourth of 6 children ultimately, and my mom and dad had a small farm ranch operation. And it was interesting, where I was born, the hospital in Cambridge has since been torn down, and there's now a car wash where that is located. So I always get to tell people I was born in a car wash.
And where did you rank in the siblings?
I was the fourth of 6.
Fourth of 6, okay.
So I have 2 older sisters and my brother, and then younger I have 2 sisters.
Okay, all right.
And one of my older sisters passed with cancer in 2003.
Yeah, well. Talk a little bit about growing up in Cambridge and some fond memories, or maybe not so fond memories, and just a little bit what life was like in the 50s and 60s growing up.
Well, you know, the one thing that was nice growing up on a farm was our parents had chores for us to do, you know, get the eggs, feed the cows, whatever. And so we learned how to work at a fairly early age. As far as this town and the school, you know, most of, I don't know how many, but a lot of the kids I started kindergarten with went all the way through and graduated together as seniors.
Wow.
And, you know, I remember when I was in kindergarten, I still didn't have quite sure how to tie my shoes. And the kid next to me was born 2 days after I was. And he showed me how to tie my shoes. And I always thought that, you know, anytime you have any kind of a technical issue, tying shoes, computers, whatever, find somebody younger, because they're going to know how to do it. So then, anyway, growing up through grade school, and one interesting thing, we had a classmate, he broke his leg in 3rd grade, and then they moved away and I never saw him. But when I started college in Lincoln, they had a get acquainted gathering, and this guy comes up to me and he said, "You're Herb TETER." And I'm like, "And who are you?" "I'm Billy Leathers." "Really?" So here this kid was that I last saw in 3rd grade, and he knew me when I'm a freshman in college.
I'll be darned.
So then you go on, you know, and of course a horrible day was November 22nd of 1963, when I was a 6th grader, and the janitor stopped by our classroom to get 2 boys to go lower the flag to have staff, because that's when we lost President Kennedy.
Wow.
And then, you know, I always was just really involved with athletics, sports. You know, I played baseball starting when I was 8, all the way to 18, and I really like sports. And anyway, junior high, high school, I was in sports year round, and you get to be part of a team, and you get to travel with the guys on the bus going to and from games, and that. So that was, I really enjoyed that. And then also, to make some money, while I was in high school, during the summers, I had a classmate, and the 2 of us would go out, and back then, alfalfa hay was in 80-pound bales approximately, And we'd go out and throw 80-pound bales, stacking them all day. And so we didn't need weight training.
Yeah, right.
That was our weight training, was just doing that.
I'll be darned.
And then, one thing that shocked me when we got to honors night my senior year, I didn't realize that the situation, and the math teacher said the outstanding math student for our class, and it was me. And I was totally shocked. And then we had to delay our 50th reunion 1 year because it would have been 2020, COVID. So we had it in 2021, and we were talking about some of the things. And I was talking to some of my classmates, and I said I was just shocked.
Was math always your favorite subject? Or?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
But they said you were the only one in the place that was shocked because everybody else knew it.
I'll be darned.
They just knew that's who was going to get it, and it never occurred to me that it was going to be me.
I'll be darned.
And then we graduated. We had a class of 37 students. The town has somehow it's been able to maintain its population pretty well, and so it's always been somewhere around 1,000 people, and it's a great town because everybody knows everybody, everybody supports everybody. The school and the athletic teams are very important to people, and so it was a great town to grow up in. It's still a great town.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So you graduate, and it sounds like went off to college then?
Yeah, I went straight to college.
Yeah, at University of Nebraska?
University of Nebraska in Lincoln. And I was there, and one of the smart things I did is I took ROTC, Army ROTC, but the second semester I was letting sports and all this other stuff interfere, and my grades were not good at all.
Oh, yeah.
And so then I was like, I'm in the wrong major, and I was. And in the summer, I saw a little ad for Career Academy of Broadcasting. So I applied. Well, they weren't going to come out to Southwest Nebraska to talk to one guy for an interview. So I went back to Lincoln, and I dropped all my classes that I had pre-registered for and retook an English class, took a couple speech classes and another class, and one of the smartest things was I got a part-time job in the mornings, so I was working and then concentrating totally on my classes. So I brought my GPA up, and I was there one semester, and then I got to go to Career Academy was based in Kansas City, Missouri, but I got to go to Houston, which turned out to be a good thing for me, and I had some good experiences there.
Well, now, so during this time, obviously the Vietnam War is on. There's the draft.
Right.
Was there? Were you able to keep your student status transferring to the School of Broadcasting, or was there a chance by dropping out of University of Nebraska that you'd get thrown into the draft, or how did that work?
My draft number was 266. And in my county, I think the highest they got to was 4.
Oh, okay.
So the draft was not even...
Oh, okay. No worries
my
there.
brother he was in college, so he's older than me, and he was in college, but that kept him from having to go to the draft.
Yeah.
But
So from there, so you take off for Houston.
Right.
And how was that? I mean, I would imagine, growing up in Cambridge that, Lincoln may have been the furthest you guys had ever traveled. Now you're down in Texas. How was that transition?
Well, I have always, for some reason, I don't care where I live, it's a great place to live.
Yeah, okay.
So I made the transition. I'm in Houston, and it's fine.
Yeah.
And I had my sights set at that time on being a sportscaster, radio, TV maybe. And so that's what I went to school for.
And you definitely found the right major. You said that first.
No, that wasn't quite.
Oh, okay.
Major.
But it was closer than what you were doing.
Oh
at
yeah,
university.
by far a lot closer.
Yeah.
Calculus killed me in college. Got me away from. But anyway, then I'm at Houston and doing radio and just went through it, and they had two courses. They had a 10-week and a 15-week. If you were at a point where you could get a job after 10 weeks, then you could.
Okay.
You graduated. If you weren't, then you went another 5 weeks. And I had all these things happen for whatever reason, but a friend of mine who was also at the school was from the northwest part of Nebraska, up in the Panhandle, and he was going to a friend's wedding just right at I think it was 9 weeks into our school. And so I rode with him, and he dropped me off at the farm, went on to the wedding. And that weekend, I went to a couple radio stations, and one of them was Holdridge, Nebraska. It's 47 miles from Cambridge. And they said, well, we'll let you know, like Monday evening. And so then when we went back to Houston, Monday evening I got a call, and they said, yeah, you can come work here. And so it was kind of like I was filling in for the guy who had eye surgery, and to see if I could actually be good at radio. I wasn't doing sports, but I was. So because of that, then I was finished right away in Houston and got to go do 6 weeks, I think it was, in Holdridge.
Wow. And then that started your career in broadcasting then?
No, actually what happened was at the end of the 6 weeks, the general manager, Mo Milliken, sat down with me and said, this is not working out. And I'm like, okay, so now I don't have a job. And then the crazy thing about Mo Milliken is he eventually ended up at Becton Dickinson in Holdridge, and my sister was working there. So then, here I am, I'm unemployed. What do? You're 20 years old. And I was kind of like, well, radio's probably not yet. And so and I'd gone to Aurora, Nebraska, and got an interview there, and the person said, I can almost guarantee you that in August, this was in June, I can guarantee you in August we'll have a place for you. Well, you're 20 years old, and you're like, do I want to wait 2 months? And it's not quite a guarantee. And so then I ended up with one day in June, I was walking, and I don't even remember if it was McCook, Nebraska, or Holdridge, Nebraska, or even possibly Lexington, Nebraska. I was in one of the three, and here's an Army recruiter's office. And I thought, for some crazy reason, my dad was in the Army. He was not. He was Army Air Corps, which became the Air Force.
Right.
But anyway, I stopped in, and I'm like, okay, let's talk. And the recruiter was saying, okay, this was June of '72. Things we're getting out of Vietnam.
Winding down.
And he said the only way you're going to go to Vietnam is if you request it. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that. Yeah. And I don't even remember. I don't know if you hypnotized me, if I could remember the MOS that I signed up for that day. So then July 18 of '72, I'm at the induction center. I go through all the physical, all the tests they do in a day. And at the end of the day, they said, your MOS is full. We don't need somebody there. But during the test, you're really good at Morse code. So we're going to give you a top secret clearance. We're going to do whatever to get you that. We're going to train you, and we're going to send you to Germany so you can intercept Morse code from the Russians and the Hungarians, the other side of the Berlin Wall.
Right.
So, okay. And people told me later, there were FBI agents in my hometown talking to people and doing all the things necessary. Well, at the time, you go for your training, your advanced training, you'd go to Fort Devens, Massachusetts. I finished basic the last week of September. But what happened was about a week left in basic training, the captain came up. There were 3 of us that were going into Morse code, and he said, I've got real bad news. He said, Fort Devens is full. So you're going to have to train with the Navy. The Navy Training Center is in Pensacola, Florida. So here I am, instead of from mid-October to mid-February in Massachusetts, I'm in Florida.
Now, how was that transition for you going from civilian life into military life with in basic training? Was it much of a change for you, a transition, or?
There really wasn't that much because I had set a goal that, and like I said, I had thought my dad was in the Army, and so I thought, well, I'm following in his footsteps.
Yeah.
And where I'd gotten that you're not going to have to go to Vietnam, I'm like, and I can do this, whatever I signed up for. And then, when I spent the night before, the 17th of July, I spent that night in a hotel that they put me up in Omaha, because it's like 3.5, 4 hours from my home. And then the next morning I get up, and so I was all focused on this is what I'm going to do for the next 3 years of active duty, and so that's fine.
So your enlistment was a 3-year enlistment?
I had a 3-year active, 3-year reserve commitment when I went in.
Okay. So move your story forward. You're down in the Panhandle of Florida. Talk.
Right. And the crazy thing was, for the first time in 10 years, they told us we actually had 1 inch or 2 of snow. And people didn't know how to drive, and we're just, a couple of us, I had a friend and roommate in advanced training who's from Oklahoma, and we're laughing because we're like, we know how to drive in this stuff, this is nothing, and these guys are like,
paralyzed,
And the really cool thing about being in Florida was we had 4 of us in the room, and one of them was from Dade City, Florida, and I had my grandmother and aunt and uncle and another aunt that were at Zephyr Hills. Zephyr Hills is not very far south of Tampa. Dade City's not very far north. So Mark and I would hop in the car on a Friday afternoon and drive, and he'd drop me off at Zephyr Hills and go back to Dade City for the weekend, come back and pick me up, and then go back to
Oh, nice.
Pensacola. So I got to see
Yeah.
my relatives
Yeah.
on several weekends.
Oh, very nice. Yeah. Yeah.
And so then, after 4 months, I still had the 2 months left, and that's when they said, okay, now you're going to Fort Devens to finish the next 2 months. But the strange thing, and I've never understood why this was the way it was, the one thing, I got 1 stripe for ROTC, so I was a private second class. And then the other thing that really puzzled me, and I've never understood why, but if we went to Pensacola and did the 4 months there, we could get 2 stripes, where the people at Fort Devens only got 1.
Wow.
Which has always kind of puzzled me. But so I was an E4 when I left Pensacola, and there were guys that were finishing up at Fort Devens that were just E2. So then, and it was the only time until recently that I was in the nation capital. From Pensacola, we changed planes at what is now Ronald Reagan Airport, and flew from Pensacola to Washington, D.C. So I'm in the airport there, and I can see the dome of the Capitol building. And then you're on the plane to Logan Airport, and they pick you up and take you to Fort Devens. So that was that. And I finished up in Fort Devens. Well, Massachusetts in mid-February to mid-April is a lot different than in January and December.
Yeah.
So.
And how did you find the training and the program? And did you enjoy it? I mean, with your mathematical mind, probably.
Well, and they told me, at the induction center, you're good at Morse code, and I was really, when I got to Germany and started copying, the code breakers, because we'd copy and put it in a basket, and the code breakers, and they said, we love your copy because it's easier to break, because it's more accurate.
I'll be darned.
So
wow.
I don't know, just some gift I was given, yeah.
So you went then after graduating from Fort Devens directly to Germany, or did you?
No, I had 2 weeks leave.
Okay, you came back home
So I was back with the family, and then they took me to Omaha and flew out of Omaha the flight was to Philadelphia because we needed to stop at Fort Dix, New Jersey for shots a few days of that, and. So and that was what was interesting. We got to Philadelphia and our luggage wasn't there, but we only had to wait about 45 minutes. And the next flight, they had the luggage there. So then we were put in a pickup and hauled to Fort Devens or Fort Dix, and we were there for 3 or 4 days, whatever. And then we were on the flight to Germany, and I don't know how or why. I have never suffered jet lag.
Really?
Really. Never.
Wow.
We flew out on a Saturday evening from New York. We got to Frankfurt. It was like 8:30 Sunday morning. They said, okay, you've got a couple hours, whatever, and I just kind of relaxed. I might have slept a little bit, and then they had lunch, and we're there, and you don't ever volunteer for anything in the military, right? They said, we need 4 volunteers, and for some reason I said, okay, I'll be one of them. Well, what they needed was 2 guys to pull head count at lunch and 2 at dinner. That's all we had to do, just do head count. And as a reward, at the end of the Sunday, and then 7 o'clock or 1900 on Sunday, They said, you've got 6 hours of liberty. They said, just go, be in Frankfurt, whatever, just be back here by 0100 tomorrow. So another guy, the guy I was with at lunch and pulled a head count, we went out and we're just going down and we stop in this little German kind of cafe and we're sitting there and the waitress comes up and she said, could I help you? And I said, ein Bier bitte. Doing my best German I could to order a beer. We never paid for a beer. We were sitting there, maybe 3 beers and 2 of us sitting there because the guys in the cafe, as appreciation for the fact that here these new Americans were trying to speak their language, we're gonna take care of you.
I'll be darned. Wow.
So it's kind of like when in Rome, do what the Romans do. These other languages, if you're in their country, please, try to speak their language. But then, and then we get back and we spend the night, and then the next afternoon, they had a bus load of us headed from Frankfurt, and every little bit along the route they would drop a few off here and there, and then I think there were 2 of us left that they dropped off at Augsburg, which is where my assignment was with the Morse code. And the craziest thing, we got there, it was dark, it had been dark since Stuttgart probably, and when I woke up the next morning, the sun was in the west. My gyroscope gets messed up. I can actually now, if I go in Walmart here in Laramie, the building is east-west. You walk in, so you're walking south. The minute I get in that store, I'm walking west instead of south. I have this messed up gyroscope.
I'll be darned.
When I was in Houston, the sun came up in the north. It's just crazy. But that's what it was. The whole time I was in Augsburg. But if I got out of Augsburg and went on leave, it'd be fine. But when I was on base, it was like so messed up.
Now, when you talk base, was it a fairly large base or just a small listening center, or what?
Well, no. They had to have it separate because there were more people. Some of the guys on base didn't have the top secret.
Yeah.
So they would load the ones who were copying the code. They would put us on buses and go to the operations center. And when you're outside the operations center, you couldn't say a word about what happened inside.
Right.
The bus drivers were Germans, and the 2 mistakes I made. Number one, when I'd sit on the bus up close to the bus driver, I should have been trying to learn the language better. And the other mistake I made was when I was in Germany, I did not get a Ural pass.
Right.
Because I could have traveled a lot more than I did. But anyway, they would take us to the operations center and we'd do our 8-hour shift. And the one thing that, I don't know how they do it now, but we were doing, you'd work 2 weeks on days from 06 to 1400, and 2 weeks then from 1400 to 2200, and 2 weeks from 2200 to 06.
Oh, jeez. And
so you'd never get your sleep cycle.
Right. Oh,
and
boy.
Jesse, who was same level as me, the 2 of us wanted to just put us on graveyard, do the 2200 to 06, and we'll do it, and we'll be fine.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't do it.
Well, talk about a shift. What an average shift would be like. What would your duties do? Be?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would go in, you would have your old radio type thing with a knob, and you'd have this old pair of headsets, and you'd put them on, and you would just kind of slowly, very slowly dial on the knob until you heard code. And then you would listen for a little bit, and if it sounded like, okay, this is something we need to, and so then you would start copying it, and if you recognized after a little while that no, this is not, then you would stop and you'd dial a little more until you found one that was you could tell this is something we need. It might not be real important, but it was something we need. And he had to be Russian, he wasn't Hungarian. There was one guy, and I hated him because what he would do, you could go along sending code about 20, 22 words a minute, and it's not that big a deal. But he would, all of a sudden, he'd be going 36.
Oh, jeez.
And I'm like, I know who this is, and I got to get this.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
So that was when you knew it was the really important stuff, and you had to do everything you could. And the way the code worked, they would send 5 numbers, a space, 5 numbers, a space. So it was always in numbers, which was not, that made it a little easier. And I don't know, it seemed like I found a system where I could actually hit the key about 3 or 4 characters after. So they'd be sending like a block of 5, and I would be typing the first one when they're sending the last one.
Wow.
And somehow it worked.
Huh.
And I got myself in a bit of a trance, where I would just be, the only thing that was going on was the noise and my ears and my fingers. It was just like a trance.
Wow.
And I was just, and I don't know, maybe that's what made it so I could do it as well as I did.
Well, going back to those different shifts, it seems like they would have thought, well, we got to keep these guys mentally sharp, and that would seem like that would throw you off a bit. Moving.
And that's what, and ultimately it did with me.
Mm.
And so that's where I thought if they had us sleeping at the same time, eating meals at the same time, copying code at the same time, you're going to be a lot more focused on that.
Yeah. Huh.
So anyway, but in the most fun ever for me, the greatest thing that happened, Christmas Eve, I'm on the graveyard shift. So it's like 23:30, and I'm copying, and it's numbers, numbers, and I was behind as usual.
Uh-huh.
And all of a sudden, it dawned on me, I'm not copying numbers, I'm copying letters. And about then, it's, okay, I got this, and it stopped. And at the bottom of my sheet, it had, Happy Christmas to the American Intercept Operator.
Wow.
They knew that we were copying them, and we knew, I mean, the intelligence back and forth, you knew, but, and they said, well, that happened once in a while. One of the guys would get that message that was, and I always thought, boy, it'd be nice somehow, some way, somewhere, this life or after or whatever, if I could meet the guy who sent that.
I'll be done.
Because I wanted to send back, and Happy Christmas to you, and I couldn't because all we could do was receive. We couldn't send.
Oh, be darned. I've got to imagine after an 8-hour shift, you were mentally spent, or
Well, it depended
Yeah.
on how busy, how much activity you'd had to do. But yeah, you could, and especially, you get the shift where you got the guy doing that 22 to 36,
right,
and it's just, but it could be mentally draining. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
There's a lot more, because you're not doing much physically, you're just sitting
right.
there and it's mental.
Right. Wow.
But
And you got back talked about the clearance and such, not talking about it. Was there ever any concern either from you or from your superiors that, say, you were on leave and you went off traveling, that any chance of being kidnapped or anything like? Was there any concern along those lines?
Well,
with your...
the one rule we had that was, at the time, we were in Augsburg, which is in southern and a little bit maybe western, West Germany at the time.
Yeah.
We could not get within 100 miles of the wall.
Oh, okay.
We were restricted where you can't get within 100 miles of that wall.
Gotcha.
And then as far as you go on leave, I wasn't aware of anything
Okay.
that they were concerned, but really there were a lot of Germans right there in Augsburg that wouldn't even know that we were what we were doing. In fact, some of the we had obviously a cafeteria in the building, the ops center, and I don't know if the cooks and them knew what exactly what we were doing. And then, so when you're on leave, it's just like you're another American, like you're an American tourist or whatever.
Yeah. And along those lines, did you get a chance to get out and explore Europe and take advantage of that?
Oh yeah, I didn't, like I said, I should have got a Euro pass, but even on a weekend or a 2-day deal, I could go to Innsbruck and spent time there. And then I had the one in where I went to took the train all the way to Brindisi, Italy, clear down in the southern end, got on a ferry across and went on a bus to Athens. And I just fall into these things. I got to Athens and I asked the bus driver about where was a place to stay. And he said, just go out to the Air Force Base on the west side of town. They have an open bay. They'll throw you in a bed for $2 a night. So that's what I did, and I spent, 4 nights there and 5 days. And it was an easy walk. I mean, it's a ways, but I could walk to the Acropolis and the Parthenon. And the funniest thing was, when I was recently, I think about that, it was like, I didn't think there were very many people at the Acropolis and at the Parthenon when I was there. And I thought for years that I didn't have my pictures from there anymore. I went through some stuff not very long ago, a couple months ago, and I found a photo album, and it had those pictures. And there were more people there than I thought.
Wow.
But yeah, I got to spend time in Athens, and then I went to, on that trip, and then when I got the one leave was in Italy, where I took the train and I went to Venice and was riding around, on the gondolas and doing that. And so when I see a picture now of Venice, I still see places, I was there 50 years ago, and So then the funniest thing, when I was in Venice, I wanted to get on the train to go to Rome, and I wasn't sure which train. And so here's this woman, and I tried in horrible Italian, and she was like, and then I tried German, which I spoke a little better, and then after that she said, "Do you speak English?" And I'm like, yeah. "Does this train go to Rome?" "Yes, thank you." So then I get to Rome and spent the night in the hotel. And of course, Rome, what are you going to do? How are you going to see Rome? I go back to the train station, and once again, the stars are all aligned. Pietro is there with his car, and he said, he could take me on this tour of Rome. And I'm like, is this guy for real? I mean, even though this was 50 years ago, I'm still thinking, is this guy for real? So he gets in his glove compartment of his car. He has a book about that thick, it's a nice sized book, and it's half full of all these testimonials of people he had taken out on. And I thought, well, yeah, it's like 600 lira or whatever, translated to like $30.
Yeah.
So we get in the car and we're going, and he stops at this apartment complex right away, and I'm like, what? And we go in, and we go up to like the 6th floor, and the door's open, and we walk in, and I'm like, this is crazy. He introduces me to his wife. She's cooking us a home-cooked breakfast. It's crazy. Go down, get in the car, takes all around, you go to the Colosseum and all the wonderful places. And at 1100, he drops me off at St. Peter's, and he said, "I'll be back in 2 hours. Just go enjoy." And I'm thinking, okay. And I get out and I walk away, and I never even thought, I'd given him my money.
Yeah.
He could have driven away and I'd have been stranded.
Yeah.
But I go in, Sistine Chapel's phenomenal. And at the time, it was before the vandalism of the Mother Mary with Christ in her lap. And that had not been vandalized. So anyway, you go in, you see all this stuff, you go in the catacombs, all this, come back out, it's just 5 minutes before 1300, and here's Pietro waiting, and get in the car, and we go on, and he takes me around to all these places, and tells me about all, because he obviously knew all history on all these things, and so he takes me to the Trevi Fountain. You throw a coin over your shoulder, and I don't know, I might have cheated and kind of looked, because I haven't made it back to Rome yet. And I may not, but anyway, the whole day was just, it was like that. And then at the end of what would have been the end, he said, for another, and I think it was like $10, he said, I'll take you out to the gardens. I don't know if it was the Tivoli Gardens or if it was another. And he took me out there, and we're out at this garden, and it's so peaceful and quiet and wonderful. And he takes me back to the train station. And so I walk to my hotel, and then I get up and I go from there to Florence. And I kind of spent a little more money than so I got in touch with my parents, and I said, could you wire me some money? And so then I get to Florence. I asked the cab driver, where is a good place to stay? And he said, well, there's this hotel, a pension, that has several Americans. And he said, you might have a room there. I go in, the clerk said, well, we're full, but Harold has 2 beds in his room, nice sized room. He said he might let you bunk with him. Harold's like, sure. Well, the Americans were a group of students a year studying abroad, and Harold was one of the adult sponsors. And they were from Gonzaga in Spokane, Washington. And there's a lot of people that can't pronounce that school's name properly, but anyway, so here I was. The money my parents wired never showed up. We don't know what happened to it, where, or anything. It never showed up. Harold, being this incredible person, said, I'll loan you that money. And he said, when you get back to base, write a check, send it to this address in Spokane, and everything's fine. He took me from Florence to the Leaning Tower of Pisa, to all these places, and it was incredible. And then, so like when I got back to base, I wrote the check for him, I gave it to him, and I sent it to that address in Spokane, and it was like maybe a month later, and it cleared my account, so everything was cool.
Wow. Boy, these travels and the things you saw must have been fascinating for this Nebraska farm boy.
Oh yeah, it was just, and I knew my mom was terrific. I had a stay-at-home mom until I was a freshman in high school, and she could teach history. She could make history. She could teach. I mean, she's sitting there, the Laura Ingalls Wilder books, Little House on the Prairie. She could teach those books and make it like you were right there. She could teach history like you were there. So I knew a lot of what had happened in Europe, and so I knew kind of the places I wanted to go and see, and so it was like, this is what I know about. This is what I learned about. So that's kind of what it was like for me.
Yeah. So then how long were you stationed over in Germany? Did you spend your whole rest of your enlistment in Germany? Or?
No. What happened, I'd been there about 14 and a half months. It was June of 1974. And I had just gotten back, 2 or 3 weeks earlier from the trip to Greece. And I was there, and on a Sunday night, I had a horrible nightmare. I was on a stage, and all around that stage, it was a round stage, and all around it was like this humongous war. Just people, just all this destruction and everything. And when I woke up, then it just weighed on my mind, and I couldn't sleep very well. And, I'm sure my work level was falling off, but not enough that it had gotten to that point. And that was Sunday night, and then Thursday in the afternoon I had worked a day shift from 06 to 1400. Got back to the barracks, and I'd lay on the bed, and I'm just desperately trying to get sleep. And they had an alert.
Oh, no.
And they were banging on my door, and they said, we know you're in there, you got to come out. And so then, things just deteriorated. Finally, my roommate, on the following Sunday, it had been a week, and I was just hallucinating. I was having all kinds of problems. But on the following Sunday, my roommate got the captain. Captain comes in. He said, you have done nothing wrong. He was so reassuring. You have done nothing wrong. So he said, we got to take you to the hospital, but it's going to be okay. We'll take care of you. And I still remember I remember him in my room. I've been told I have a photographic memory, and I'm sure that's the case. But I remembered part of the bus ride, or the ride, whatever, the ambulance, whatever they had me in, probably an ambulance, to the hospital. And of course, with my clearance, they had people in my section at the operations center, 8-hour shifts in my room. So that if I said something or started to, then they would clear the room. If there was anybody in there, if there was a nurse or whoever, you're out. So I went through that, and I was there a few days, and then it started being a fight between the security agency who wanted to get me well so I could go back to my duty, or do we medevac the guy home?
Wow.
And it was like 2.5 weeks of that going on. And finally the security agency said, well, we're just going to have to let him be medevaced. So then, and it was ironic, the day I got medevac back was 2 years to the day when I was in the hotel room in Omaha getting ready to go to the induction center the next day, July 17. So they flew me from Augsburg to Frankfurt, then from Frankfurt to Andrews Air Force Base at Washington, from there to Fort Scott, Illinois, spent the night, and flew me on the 2-year anniversary of me being in the induction center to Fitzsimmons at Denver, which at the time was a hospital facility. And I was there. They offered me a medical. I said no, because when I was on the farm, you don't stop your chores in the middle. And when I was running distance, you finish the race even if you're last. And so I was committed. I told them 3 years active. And so I said, nope, I'm not doing medical. And I was there a month or so, and I had a relapse. And then they offered again, the medical. I said no. And so finally it was like 1st of December, I got my reassignment to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And I was there for the last 7 months, what was left on my 3 years.
Did they ever determine what triggered? I mean, it had to be a horrific nightmare. You still remember the details 50 years later.
Oh yeah.
Was there?
With that nightmare, I didn't even realize I had PTSD.
Well, yeah, we'll get into that because you just off camera you talked about it, you just recently determined that was determined. But at the time, what did they die? I mean, did they understand what triggered it or what triggered that nightmare? Was it obviously work related?
I don't remember that they even got into what had triggered the nightmare. In fact, I'm not even sure that I had told my roommate at the barracks or the captain what had caused me to start not sleeping.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure I told them at that time. I don't think I did.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to wait until we do post-military to talk about your diagnosis that you recently had, or do you want to, as we're on the subject, talk about how just recently you're finally...
No, we can wait.
Okay.
We'll wait on that.
All right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you finish out the last 7 months of your enlistment, and then got out.
Right. I got the released from active duty.
Yeah, right.
I still had the 3 years reserve.
Sure.
So I got released from active duty 17 July 75. I'm driving home. I've got a couple guys with me, and I dropped them off. And the last one I dropped off was at East Memphis, St. Missouri,
Yeah.
right across. And he said, you got to get a motel room and spend the night, because I was driving all the way back to southwest Nebraska. I get into, and I don't know why, I was in East St. Louis in Illinois, because I shouldn't have been. Somehow I was there. It's like 0100 on the 18th of July, and I got stopped. And the police officer said, you ran a red light. And I said, it was yellow. And he said, you're tired. Your response is delayed. You thought it was yellow, but it had turned red. And I told him, well, can I get to the other side of St. Louis so I don't have traffic in the morning and get a motel room? And he gave me his consent. And he should have just said, no, I'm taking you to a motel right now. I got on the other side of St. Louis. Well, I'd been driving again. I had shaken off some of that, and I kept driving. I got all the way. I was probably an hour and a half east of Kansas City, and I fell asleep.
Oh, jeez.
Driving on the interstate. It's probably between 0530 and 0545. Car goes down into the median, and fortunately it gets down there and it's bouncing around like crazy, and it wakes me up. And that's one time in my life I did not panic. A lot of times I'll panic, but that time I didn't, and it wasn't like I yanked the wheel and rolled the car and who knows what disaster. I just gradually pulled it back up on the interstate. There's no traffic at that hour. Drive to the next exit, pull off. There's a gas station there. Not much else, but a gas station. I pull in, parking lot, and lean my head against the window. It's 0600. Tap, tap, tap on the window. It's 0800. That quick. And the guy said, we're opening this station. You have to leave. And I'm like, okay. I got my 2 hours of sleep. And so then I was able to drive on to the farm.
I'll be darned. Wow.
And so then my plan was, I still was thinking radio. And so I went back to Kearney, now it's University of Nebraska at Kearney. Then it was Kearney State College. And I went back with an eye on that, so I was working at the radio station and taking classes, and it just, after the fall semester, then it was like, well, I had a relapse on my bipolar disorder is what it ended up being. I had a relapse in the fall of 75 and spend 2 weeks in the hospital there. And so I'm going through all this again, and I'll never forget my dad, because he obviously, nobody understood bipolar.
Yeah, right.
And I'll never forget him. What happened, it was crazy. On Thanksgiving Day, there was a guy in the hospital. We were at Hastings on that time. There was a guy in the hospital from Cambridge, from my hometown. And he was going home for Thanksgiving. And I asked if I could go along. He didn't know. I was not supposed to leave the building. And so he's like, sure. And I got in the car and we started out. Well, then they missed me at the hospital facility. And they thought, I know where he's going. So they called my parents and they said, well, you can keep him for the weekend and then bring him back on Monday. So I spent Thanksgiving, and then Monday morning, my sister and my mom were going to take me back. It's 100 miles from Cambridge to Hastings. And they were going to take me back. And my dad, I'll never forget, he looked me in the eyes and he said, try to make it. So I got back to the hospital. I was there 2 more weeks. And right before Christmas then, I got to go home. And then I had to, I don't remember what all, for the semester that because I'd been missed the last 6 weeks or so of the semester. But anyway, then the second semester, I'm taking classes. I'm totally lost. I don't know what I want to do with my career. And so I was going home from Kearney. It's 80 miles, virtually every weekend. And I got to, the summer came along, and so then I didn't go back to school, and I spent a year, different odd jobs, nothing, just these odd jobs. And then, July of 77, 15th was a Friday. Unemployed, needed money, I'm living with my parents at home. Drive down on Main Street, there's the post office on one side, the bank on the other side, and I see the owner of the newspaper. And I just do one of these angle parks where you go the wrong way. And I go up to him, I said, is there anything I can do? And he said, be in my office at 2 o'clock. So I get there. I didn't say a word. He said, my feature writer quit 2 weeks ago. My son's going back to college next month. We'll start you part-time and see where it goes. Monday was my first day, July 18th, the 5-year anniversary of me at the induction center of the military. And I knew at the end of that day I had found it. So that's what I did for 39 years.
I'll be darned. Yeah. Talk about some of the highlights of your career, some of the various places you worked, and some of the.
Sure.
Yeah, a little bit of talk.
So I worked in my hometown for 4 years, and then I told Alan in May that I was going to go back to college in August. Gave him like 3 months' notice, and he worked out a deal where he actually had it so I could own the newspaper. He had a percentage deal over the course of the years, and I would end up owning it. Well, I didn't want that. I did not want, I wanted sports. So I go back to Kearney and spent 2 years there to get my degree in journalism. So, and Alan knew a friend who had a small newspaper, a weekly newspaper. He actually owned 2 of them. One was at Gibbon and one was at Shelton, just east of Kearney. And Alan talked to Doug, and so Doug was like, yes, please come work for me. So I had a part-time job lined up as soon as I got to Kearney, and I worked at Gibbon, and mostly for the Gibbon paper. And I was there the first year, and then I also had talked to the guys at the Kearney paper, which is a daily, and so then my second year I got to do part-time sports for the Kearney paper. And then so I did that, graduated, and I've always, since I was like a junior high kid, I've loved the number 13. I had a really good Friday the 13th, so I adopted that number. When I was playing baseball in Legion Baseball, I wore number 13. I always loved 13. Our graduation day, May of 1983, Friday the 13th. And then on Monday, Fremont had already said, get over here. So I went to Fremont, Nebraska. It was a daily paper. But I was doing what we call cops and robbers, covering court cases, doing these kind of things. And that wasn't where I was at. And so then at the beginning of the school year in September, Alan called me from my hometown and said, we need somebody, would you come back? So I went back, and I was there that fall and until Christmas, and I got a call from Cozad, Nebraska. At that time it was twice a week paper, and they said, how about coming to work for us? So I moved there, and I worked, but I wasn't doing much sports. So then 8 months later, in early September of 1984, Alan Strunk, who owned his family had founded the newspaper. They owned this daily newspaper, McCook, Nebraska, called and said, would you be my sports editor? And I'm like, well, of course. So I moved there, and then I was there 14 years. But you're a sports editor at a daily newspaper. I got to cover Nebraska University sports. I got to go to Boulder, Colorado, and Fort Collins, Colorado, cover University of Colorado, Colorado State.
Oh, really? Oh.
Got to cover the Colorado Rockies, got to cover I got to be good friends with some of the guys on the old Lake Street Bombers in the late 90s, Dante Bichette.
Oh, wow.
Guys on that team, and, just was in seventh heaven, but Dean at Cozad called in the fall, right when we were transitioning from fall sports to winter sports, and made me an offer that I just couldn't refuse. This time, however, when I went back to Cozad, it was sports. And they'd gone from twice a week to just once a week. And so it was a lot easier, and it was most always sports. But the one highlight there was I got to meet Evan Wolf. Evan was in 4-H, and I covered 4-H. I was a farm kid.
Yeah.
He was a distance runner in high school, like I was. We had this real good friendship right away. And so then, when he graduated in 2002, I got to do the story of him getting an appointment to West Point Military Academy. And I joked, I said, I'll come to your graduation. 2 years later, we were at the Veterans Memorial at North Platte, Nebraska, and I saw him, and I had moved from Cozad to Ogallala, Nebraska, twice a week paper. I was sports editor there, and we were talking a little bit, and then I went and covered a golf tournament the first Friday in May of 2006. I get back from the golf tournament, and on my desk is an invitation to Evan's graduation at West Point. I go to my boss, And I said, I got an invitation to West Point. What do I do? Go to West Point. And it actually worked out. I left Ogallala on Thursday, got back on Tuesday, never missed a minute of work. So I go to Denver, fly to New York, rent a car, and the car I rented was a spitting image of my car. I had a 2004 Malibu, tan. I get to White Plains, New York, go to get my rental car, and it's a 2006 Malibu tan. So it's just like they flew my car from Denver to, it was crazy. I go out, I get in the car, I drive to West Point, and so on Friday evening they had the banquet before the graduation on Saturday. And I had told Lieutenant Colonel Casella in the media department that I was pulling a surprise on Evan. He wasn't going to know I was there. So we're walking into the banquet, and Lieutenant Colonel Casella is kind of weaving a little bit. We got to the table, and I'm like, what was that about? He said, I had to make sure your cadet didn't see you. And I'm like, yeah, like he was going to see me. But then the next morning, I get to the security, and of course the guest speaker is what made security so tight. I go in, and when they were wanding me, they had it beeped right up here, and I'm like, okay, what's this? And I said, that's my sunglasses. I have just a little metal on each bow. And so he takes a wand, lifts my coat, and he said, take those out very slowly. Because they were just crazy, because what happened then, and I'd found out, like 3 weeks earlier, I'd checked, the guest speaker was President George W. Bush. So I was there for that graduation. And so I go in. The craziest thing was I go in and it's dark except some candles. And they used the visitors' locker room for the media. I'm like, and they said, well, the power went out. So they were checking credentials by candlelight. So anyway, my credentials, White House Press Pool, I got to be that for a couple hours. Because anyway, and then I go out and they have the graduation, and I don't remember who it was said that they heard the national anthem one time and it will never sound the same again. When I heard the U.S. military band play that national anthem that day, it has never sounded the same in 18 years.
Wow.
But anyway, I get on the media platform 20 yards from the President of the United States, and I was standing there. It's an aluminum setup. There's 3 steps up to the platform that are aluminum. And all of a sudden, while the president was speaking, I realized somebody's standing next to me. And I kind of glance over out of the corner of my eye, and I'm like, that's a Secret Service agent. And he has dress shoes on. And he got up 3 steps on aluminum without me hearing him. Those guys are really good.
Wow.
And there were snipers. We saw snipers.
Yeah.
And it was just the whole thing, even 18 years later. I mean, it's surreal.
Yeah.
It was, but it's one of the two highlights of my life.
Wow.
So anyway, then I went back and had 10 more years on my career, and
So how many years altogether were you in journalism?
39.
39 years. Wow.
And then this is another thing that was crazy. I lost sight when I was in high school of what I wanted to do. When I was 9 years old, I knew I wanted to be a sports writer.
Really?
And I totally lost that. But the benefits that I've gotten by being in the military, by serving the country, by getting everything I've gotten, I never would have got if I'd have gone straight out of high school into journalism and into sports writer.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Well, is this a good time to talk about what your military benefits and such, your recent prognosis?
Sure.
Yeah, and talk about how that all came about.
Well, what happened then is I actually had, in 1984, I had another episode. 1989, another one. And then in 1992.
Oh, geez.
And that time was when Dr. Yaron Zedek diagnosed the bipolar. The original.
So up to this point, that wasn't diagnosed?
No.
All your previous episodes? Oh, wow.
Because they didn't even diagnose bipolar, I don't think, on anybody until about 1990, 1991. But you go back to 1974, the diagnosis when I was in Germany was schizophrenia.
Oh.
As they've learned in recent years, more and more, schizophrenia and bipolar are really closely related. So the original diagnosis was not that far off, and it was really as good as they could have gotten at that point.
Yeah.
The big problem was they didn't know what they know now, which is you need sleep. You need your sleep, and what we're going to do, like Dr. Zedek did, we're going to put you on this, and you're going to take it every day the rest of your life. And so that's what I've done for 32 years, and I've only had one time, and I went one night I was 3 or 4 hours of sleep, the next night no sleep, and I immediately called my boss and I said, I've got a problem. He knew I was bipolar. He said, go get help. And they just boosted the level of medication I was on, and I've been fine.
Oh, be done. Wow. Now, so we're up to this point now where you're finally diagnosed with PTSD.
Well, I didn't get diagnosed with PTSD then.
No, but up to we know now. Recently you did.
Yeah.
Can they trace that back to that very first episode? Is that what triggered that episode, or how was it?
Yeah. Yeah. This is what happened. That nightmare, that horrible nightmare. Yeah. I didn't know that you never lose your past. And that's one of the cool things about the Patton Veterans Project that we did in April, the one we did that's on YouTube. You know, Haley is trying to run away from her past. And ultimately she learns her past is always with her, and she just has to forgive herself for anything that she might have been thinking that was bad and she'd done wrong or whatever. She just had to forgive herself. Well, so here I was, not thinking about your past is always with you.
Yeah.
And I'd gone I never thought I had PTSD.
Yeah.
And then I was at the Veterans Fair on May 25th, just a few weeks ago, and they have Veterans Talking to Veterans Project in Wyoming, and they have the coaches that they go through. They learn how to be a coach. They start groups, and so veterans can talk to veterans. And two of the coaches I had met, one of them on Thursday night, one of them on Friday night, and here it is Saturday morning. They're in line because they're getting their diploma as a graduate, as a coach. And I'm sitting there, and Robert's up here, and Whit is right by here, in line, like there's 2 or 3 people in between them. And what they did is you could talk at the podium before you got your diploma and picture with the governor. And they're standing, and one person started talking about a dream. Bam, it's 1974. I'm in a nightmare. That quick. I'm in that nightmare. And I start crying, and Robert comes up and leans over, and he said, "You're safe." Whit comes up, and in just a little bit, I'm like, this is 2024. This is not Germany. This is not 1974. You're fine. Because you've had a wonderful 50 years since 1974. As wonderful as anybody could have. You got to do the career you wanted. You got to do all of this. You're fine. And then I talked to one of the guys who did one of the other films that we did with the Patton Veterans Project in April. And he was a great listener. I talked to him about what happened. I talked to Robert the next day about it. So I talked to people about it. And now it's like, okay, I can talk about this. I can visit with people about this. I can say, hey, this is what happened, and I do have PTSD, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Because as far as nobody knows any cure.
Yeah.
You're always going to have it, but you learn how to live with it, and you can be, and what was really cool then, how I got associated with the Patton Veterans Project. Through Wyoming PBS, in January, they sent a note that they were going to, that Ben and Governor Gordon were going to be at...
Ben Patton.
Patton, yes.
Yeah.
And Governor Gordon were going to be in Laramie on the 25th of January for a public screening of the previous ones they had done in Laramie. And I went to that, and I met Ben, and met the governor, and committed myself to the one in April that we've done.
Well, let me back up, and correct me if I'm wrong. I'm trying to make, to me personally, I see a connection. That dream sounds like, hellish after nuclear war.
Right.
Here you are in the thick of the Cold War, really on the front lines with Russia, really our enemy at the time.
Well, yeah.
Is that all? Am I connecting the dots there as to what really kind of prompted that dream? Do you think, or?
Very, very possible. That is, I had never thought about that because, like I said, I hadn't really thought about the nightmare for a while.
Yeah.
But that very well could be that here I am, right there And
I mean, the things that you're listening,
knowing we have to keep an eye
Yeah.
on these people
Yeah.
because this is really important stuff.
right?
You know, we almost got sent, a few of us, I guess, when they had the 7 Days War in the fall of '73. They were talking that if that had gotten extended a few days longer, some of us were likely going to be on a ship in the Mediterranean intercepting code.
Well, there
And
was
I'm thinking,
that one ship got attacked. But
And-
what?
and I'm thinking, here we are in 1973, and Israel and Egypt are at it.
Yeah,
And if we're in the Mediterranean, what are the Russians going to think about that ship?
yeah. Well, didn't one of our communication ships get attacked in that war? So
Very well.
very well could have been.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And so all of this was building up
Sure.
and building up. And you're probably right. That dream probably, that nightmare wasn't a
Yeah,
dream.
yeah,
It
right.
was a nightmare. And yeah, that very well could have been the trigger.
Wow, how fascinating.
And my mom knew something was wrong because I always wrote, like every week, I'd send, all we had was snail mail.
Yeah, yeah.
And I always wrote, like once a week I would send a letter. She didn't get a letter. She knew something was wrong.
Yeah. And mother's intuition, for sure. Wow. Well, I would imagine it's been somewhat of a relief to put a name to what you've been going through finally after all
Well,
this
yeah.
year, you know.
It's been a great relief.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, for the last 3.5 weeks, it's been a huge relief.
Yeah, carrying that for 50 years and to finally, wow.
Carrying something you didn't know you were carrying.
Right, right.
I mean, some of these guys, they know they have PTSD.
Wow.
But no, it's been huge. It's
Yeah.
been huge
Good.
to get that out. And that's why, and this is what happened then. The night that I met Ben Patton and Governor Gordon was there, Mark Twain has a great quote. The two most important days of your life, the day you're born and the day you find out why.
Yeah.
And I had wondered, I survived what could have been fatal on driving home from the military. I've survived farm accidents. I've survived all these things. And I always kind of in the back of my mind was like, why? That night, I know why. It's my mission. Veterans talking to veterans. It's my mission. Patton Veterans Project. If you can get involved with Patton Veterans Project, do it. It's a great thing. Short films, it's on YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah.
Get involved.
Yeah.
And if you're in any place where you can get veterans groups together and talking to each other, because veterans know what other veterans have gone through.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then there was one other thing that happened. It was, you talk about a great birthday weekend. Or my birthday's January 29. I met Ben Patton on the 25th, on Thursday. Saturday, the 27th, I got a call from Susan Chase. And I got to go on the honor flight.
Yeah.
And that is the coolest thing.
Well, that goes along the lines of what you were just talking about. I mean, the mission is to get out and see the monuments in Washington, D.C., but I think just as important is the camaraderie and being
Exactly.
talking with other veterans during that time period. Yeah.
Well, it's just like Matt, the president,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
now, what he said, I don't know that he said it to us, but he was quoted in a newspaper article as how these guys get together they've got them in like Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska,
Mhm.
you've never met.
Yeah.
You get there, you start visiting a little bit, you get on that plane, and all of a sudden you're buddies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's one thing that happened to me. I was on that honor flight. We landed in Baltimore. I had my Patton Veterans Project shirt on. A guy comes up. What's that about? I told him. He said, when I was in Vietnam 4 or 5 times, I flew Ben's dad,
Wow.
Colonel Patton at the time. And then he connected me with Charlie Watkins, who was Colonel Patton's chief pilot in Vietnam. And I have since been able to visit and be with Charlie Watkins. All these connections and all these things that I've been so blessed with.
All coming together.
It's all come together.
It's a shame it didn't come together sooner.
Well,
all that years of suffering that, you know.
Well, but like I said, it wasn't really a lot of suffering. I'd have an episode and it was then, and then everything would be fine for a while, and then again. But the part about that nightmare hanging around in my head that I just didn't know about.
Yeah.
But like I said, now it's so important to get guys. And I talked to a guy when I was at Greeley just last week.
Yeah.
Because they'd had at Ames College, they'd had a one in May, the workshop, and they had the public screening, and I went to that. And I was talking to one of the guys who was he's with the Moose Lodge, and he said he has been waiting for guys that were like a little older or he felt a little more qualified. Don't wait. Don't wait. You might not. We don't know how many tomorrows we get. I hope I get 20 years worth, but we don't know.
Right.
And if you're waiting, you might not get to go. And this is a whole bunch of volunteers, and they have them throughout the country, and it's a nation paying back what we didn't get 50 and 60 years ago.
That's
because
right.
Even though I never set foot in Vietnam, I got verbally abused a couple of times just because I was in uniform.
Yeah.
But you get on that flight and they treat you like royalty.
Yeah.
We were at the World War II Memorial, and we had teenage kids coming up and thanking us.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
It's just a huge, huge thing in a way that a nation is saying what we never heard.
Yeah.
Welcome home.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm glad that's all has come together. A lot of good things have come together recently, and it sounds like now you're back to giving back again, and that's your mission now to spread the word to other veterans.
That's the whole thing, you know.
Yeah. Wow.
It's just to get as many people aware of Patton Veterans Project. Get them aware. If there's a veterans group anywhere, get involved with it, you know. Talk to others and because I've been given so much, you know. I mean, you can say, well, this, but at the same time, with all the BA benefits I've been given, it's just, you know, it's been, I mean, when I walk around and I feel like I'm the most fortunate individual out there, and I know, I just wish I could, every time I shake hands with somebody, I could pass some of that off to them. I always try to say, have a great day, have a great weekend. I always want to make people happy. I want to do everything I can to spread positivity because there's way too much negativity in this country. Let's just all the wonderful things we have in this country.
Wow. Wow. Well, Herb, as we start to wind down this interview, is there anything, I know I only got the tip of your iceberg of your story, but is there anything I didn't bring up that you wanted to talk about? Any other stories that have floated to the top as we've been talking here that you wanted to get out, so that hopefully, ideally, we round out your story a little bit better? Or do you think we got pretty much everything down that you wanted to say in this interview?
I think we're there.
Yeah.
I think we've got it.
Well, one question I always like to ask towards the end of the interview, as you look back at your time in the military, is it something maybe we answer that in this interview, did it change your life, affect your life, play a role in your life at all, or do you look at it as just simply a chapter in your life that you went through? How would you answer that?
Oh no, it's not just a chapter. It's probably the best decision I ever made in my life was telling that Army recruiter, sign me up. Because it made a world. I grew up some, I had to learn about why in basic training they take you from being an individual, they break you down, then they bring you back as a member of a team, so you know that you are kind of responsible for your buddies, and your buddies are working to help take care of you. It's kind of like, there should be no man left behind, but you've got to protect your buddies, and they're going to be looking out for you. You're all part of a team.
Yeah.
That's the whole idea, basic, is to get you to where you know.
Okay.
And that was one of the cool things about the time I did in Pensacola. The Navy and the Army, they might battle on the football field, but they're a team. They're a team. There are actually people going into the Navy who go through West Point, and people who go through the Naval Academy who end up going to the Army. So they'll trade different places depending on where they can get the kid an appointment, and then what they want to do. And so they'll actually go through some of those service academies and end up with a different branch. But the branches are all part of the same tree. We're all together in this.
Yeah. Well, as we close, is there any sort of closing statement you'd like to make to those that you might share this interview with? Or are you happy with ending it as is?
Well, just keep an upbeat attitude. Be looking as an optimist, because there's so much more to be optimistic about than all the negative stuff that's floating around out there. And I guess one thing is we should always remember this is the United States of America. As difficult as that is at times, we're still Americans. We're still part of the same great, phenomenal country, and let's just keep that in mind so that we can keep this a great, great country.
Wow, that's wonderful. Well, Herb, I want to thank you for sitting down to tell a fascinating story, but just as important, I want to thank you for your service to our country.
And what I got taught, Brad, May 2nd, I had my primary care visit, and my primary care provider was running a little late, and I was talking to the nurse, and I just got back from the honor flight, and she said she had heard from somebody recently what she considered the perfect response when somebody says, "Thank you for your service." And I've been doing that since the 2nd of May, and it's the perfect response. You are worth it. What I did, you are worth it.
and I've heard as well to that. As a civilian, I should be worthy of that.
Well, that's fine, but like I said, you know, when I was at Fort Carson, I got prompted. I always have these promptings, and it seems if I'm listening to the right. So I go back to the museum after the commemoration, and I'm deciding, do I go in the museum and look around, or do I go out and shoot pictures of all the stuff outside? And I decide to go outside first. As I get over there, there's a female in uniform with a boy, and I just said, thank you for your service, and she said, I bet you were in the service. And we had a nice little conversation. And then at the end, she said, thank you for your service. And I said, you are worth it. Her arm comes around me, and then she had me shake hands with the little boy, and I'm like, let's get away from each other, because you're going to see me cry, and you're going to be crying, and that's not a good thing. But that is so priceless. Yeah. You cannot ever. You know, and I see a couple in Walmart that's older than I am, and I tell them, and it's been so much outpouring of thank yous.
Wow.
And, you know, people, they're like, you know, yeah, that is so good. And I was walking out of Walmart one day, and the associate is sitting there. He didn't say thank you for your service. He said, welcome home.
Yeah. Hopefully that's never too late. It was sad. It was awful the way.
That's the thing. It's on my hat. That one deal there said it's not too late. Welcome home.
Yeah. Too bad it didn't happen 50 years ago. I'm glad.
But it's like. I was trying to think of it. Was Skip Johnson? I think it was Skip Johnson at our send-off. You remember?
Oh yeah.
You changed this country.
That's right.
You woke the country up. This will never happen again.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were there.
Okay, yeah.
You were there. That's where we met.
Yeah.
And boy, I'm glad we did.
Yeah.
See, that's another thing. All these people keep coming into my life at the right time in the right place, and it leads to, I mean, who knows where this is going to go.
Yeah, yeah.
And you, if I have to put my name on something, you have my permission totally to get this on YouTube.
Okay.
And get it out to whoever sees it.
Very good. Will do.
I wouldn't mind if the whole world sees it.
Very good. Well, it's done. So, well, once again, Herb, thank you very much for your time today.
Sure. And this is the baseball glove I wore when I was in the last 3 or 4 years of my Legion baseball career, which I wasn't very good, but they stuck me at first base because I could catch the ball most of the time, and I wasn't a very good hitter at all, but I could play a little defense, and we only had like 9 or 10 guys, so I couldn't hardly just sit and watch, so that's what this glove's about. This picture kind of shows that sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. I was actually focused on the quarterback for the picture, and I realized he was going to throw the ball to this receiver in the corner of the end zone. So I just turned 90 degrees and hit the button on the camera, and apparently the focus obviously was there, and I got the picture without even being aware, and it was a digital camera, so I saw a little image and I thought, well, at least I got a picture, but I have no idea if it's in focus or what. And as it turned out, you know, you can see the hair on the kid's legs and arms, and it just probably the best picture I ever got, and it was way more luck than good.
I'll be done.
This was a picture I took when I was covering the 2006 graduation at the United States Military Academy at West Point, and President George W. Bush, who was the sitting president at the time, was the guest speaker. This is a picture of President Bush congratulating Evan Wolf upon his graduation at West Point. And Evan and I were really good friends ahead of this, and that's who I got to be at West Point to cover his graduation, and President Bush was the speaker. This is a picture of the first time Evan saw me at the graduation. We had kept it a secret from him that I was going to be there, and this was after the ceremony and after the hat toss, and when I was in the crowd, and then he saw me for the first time, and this was a picture taken by his grandfather.
And you said, and where's Evan now?
He's a lieutenant colonel, and he's at Fort Bliss, Texas.
Very good.
This is the tote bag you receive when you first arrive at the ranch in Loveland to go on the honor flight. This is the tote bag that they give you to put your, like if you have a camera or other personal items, you get this bag, you get a shirt, and you get a jacket and a cap as part of the gift. The trip is all on donations from the public. This is the fishing cap that I put together as a prop for my role as Haley's grandpa in our Patton Veterans Project film that we did, ... and beyond. And that film, along with 300 plus others, can be seen if you go to Patton Veterans Project YouTube.
And once again, the title of your film was ...
and beyond.
Okay.